Nunez. The party sailed in the ship the Southern Cross and spent the southern winter of 1899 at Cape Adare, the northwest extremity of the Ross Sea coastline. Here they carried out an extensive program of scientific observation, although opportunities for inland exploration were severely restricted by the mountainous and glaciated terrain surrounding the base. In January 1900, the party left Cape Adare in Southern Cross to explore the Ross Sea. Following the route taken by the Ross 60 years earlier, they reached the Great Ice Barrier, where a team of 3 made the first sled journey on the barrier surface, during which the farthest south record latitude was established. On its return to England, the expedition was poorly received by London's geographic establishment, which was resentful of the preemption of a role they envisioned for their own national Antarctic discovery expedition. There were also questions about his leadership qualities and criticism of limited amounts of scientific information which the expedition provided. Despite groundbreaking achievements in the Antarctic survival and travel, he was never accorded the heroic status of Scott or Shackleton, and his expedition was soon forgotten in the dramas which surrounded these and other heroic age explorers. Roald Amundsen, conqueror of the South Pole in 1911, acknowledged his expedition had removed the greatest obstacle to Antarctic travel and had opened the way for all expeditions that followed. Technically, the next would be the Scott expedition, but that's one of the special ones, and I'll cover that alone probably next week. So we have the Gauss expedition, 1901 to 1903, was the first German expedition to Antarctica. It was led by geologist Erich von Drygalski in the ship Gauss, named after the mathematician and physicist Carl Friedrich Gauss. Drygalski led the first German southern polar expedition with the ship Gauss to explore the unknown area of Antarctica lying south of the Kerguelen Islands. Expedition started from Kiel on August 11, 1901. A small party of the expedition was also stationed on the Kerguelen Islands, while the main party proceeded further south. Erich von Drygalski paid a brief call to Heard Island and provided the first comprehensive scientific information on the island's geology, flora, and fauna. And despite their entrapment in the ice for nearly 14 months, until February 1903, new territory was discovered, Kaiser Wilhelm II Land and its volcano Gaussberg. Drygalski was the first to use gas balloons in Antarctica. The expedition arrived back in Kiel in November 1903. Subsequently, Erich von Drygalski wrote the narrative of the expedition and edited the voluminous scientific data. Between 1905 and 1931, he published the 20 volumes and 2 atlases documenting the expedition. Okay, I think that's going to do it for history for this week. I'm going to move on to questions. And this one comes from Rebecca. She says, do you think outposts in extreme biomes on Earth give us a good testing ground for how to create dwellings, colonies, or stations on extraterrestrial rocks, like moons, Mars, asteroids, etc.? Absolutely. One of the things that really sticks out here, and I saw this in visiting Scott Base, is the difference in design. So here on McMurdo, we have a lot of large, hard-to-maintain buildings. And Scott Base is a small, relatively enclosed, and for the most part, 90% of that base is basically one large connected set of buildings. I mean, they have some other outposts that they have to get to, that, scientific stuff, but they don't do that in the winter. And that, I think that is really a building ground for stuff for living on extreme conditions on extraterrestrial places. Take the pole buildings, for example, at the South Pole. Now, not only are all these connected, but they're on a special riser system, which they're basically hydraulic legs, and they're designed so that every 5 or 6 years they can lift the building up above the ice, and they have like a 20 or 25 foot that they can raise the buildings all together. So it's got like a 30 or 40 year lifespan on these buildings. But, like I said, they're all connected. And because the environment is constantly building more and more ice, they had to design it in such a way that they could raise the buildings up and make them last longer. Because there are several buildings at the South Pole that are 20 feet under ice, and they were just built there 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And it's ridiculous that the amount of waste that went into those buildings that are now completely lost in the ice forever. Another thing that we learn in these extreme conditions is the ability to keep spare parts for these buildings and the necessity of keeping enough spare parts in a situation like here where our nearest normal plane is months apart. Like here in the winter, we haven't had a plane since April. We won't have another plane till August. And they don't just ship down parts just because we need them. It's too expensive unless it's, the only time really they bring a plane in off schedule is for medevac. And that's pretty rare. So yeah, it definitely plays, it is certainly ways to look at it. I mean, if you look at some of the winds we get, now we get some pretty strong winds here. And they have to stand up to a lot of abuse from the elements. And I imagine that's very similar to the sort of abuse they would get on a place like Mars, where it's extremely cold and extremely windy. And one of the things we have to deal with here, much like on Mars, would be fine particles. So we get our own form of dust storms here, because in the summer we mostly see a lot of dirt and fine particles because we are on a volcano. So it's not, they're very sandpaper gritty type particles, and a lot of our equipment has to deal with that. A lot of our filtering systems for the air has to deal with that. And I imagine, much like on Mars, where you're going to have a very similar type of soil, that you'll have to deal with that too in your vehicles and your air filtration systems and all this other stuff. I mean, just packing it in on our bodies. I have to vacuum my room every few days. Well, not necessarily a few days, but more often than you would think, simply because there's so much dirt and rocks that come in with us. And then construction. The style of construction, is a dome better? Is a solid wall better? We get to learn these things in a real environment that is hard to maintain, and get to test them here where it's relatively safe, as opposed to sending these things to Mars and then we find out that it's going to fail. And so better fail here where we're 8-10 hours away from emergency help than 6 months. So yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things about that is the research done here can be taken into extraterrestrial and space travel. The isolation is another big deal that we can play with. In fact, there is currently a NASA research study going on that I didn't get a chance to join on to. I thought I did, but apparently I filled out the paperwork wrong and now it's too late. About isolation. They do this every year down here, so maybe next year I'll get to do it. All right, I have another question from Heather and her kids, and that is, do pipes freeze often? Thankfully, no, but they do freeze, and a lot of factors go into that. One is how cold it is outside, how windy it is outside, and whether or not the systems that are supposed to keep them from freezing are working. So I've covered this, I think, last episode about heat trace and how they keep our pipes warm. Well, invariably, every winter, some pipes do freeze, and they got to get fixed. So, yeah, and it's our water pipes and our waste that tend to freeze. So that's pretty important that we keep those working. So, yeah, they do freeze down here. And the last question from Heather and her kids was, what weird rules do you have to follow? So, some of the stuff we have to follow deal with communication. Like, I can't say this is the official podcast of, the Antarctic program. That just, one, it wouldn't be true. And two, I could get in a lot of trouble for saying it is. We also have to be careful with what we say within our communications with the outside world in general. We don't want to give away, I don't want to say they restrict what we say, but they would prefer there's things that we don't necessarily have a lot of input on. Things that would make the NSF look bad, or things like that. Just, we got to be careful with our communication. It is one of the big ones. Another weird that's not really a rule, but it's more like a social construct down here, is the discussion of politics and religion. Those are pretty hot button issues, and we tend to not go too deeply on them in a public setting. It's okay to discuss them with your friends, but one of the things they suggest down here is that you don't do it in an open forum, because we are isolated here, and politics and religion get people pretty heated and pretty angry sometimes, and fights can happen over long-term arguments, and we need to live and work with each other in reasonable peace. We have enough personality issues without throwing those two in there. So yeah, that's, other than, certain rules about hygiene. So we absolutely have to wash our hands with antibacterial soap every time we go into the galley, whether we're eating or not, just to keep the public spaces clean and as microbe free as possible. We're not allowed to dispose of any liquids outside. They don't even really want us pouring water on the ground. We're supposed to clean up every spill of everything and report it, because that's part of the treaty. We have to, every bit of our trash is sorted. So we have to sort our own trash. So there's food waste, there's burnable waste, there's landfill waste, there's recyclables, cardboard, aluminum, ferrous metal, non-ferrous metal. It all gets sorted and shipped off the continent, and they get pretty mad if you don't sort it right. They will literally bring the bag to you and make you resort it if they can find out that it's yours. And they're apparently pretty good at it. So yeah, those are just a couple of the weird rules we have to follow down here. And I think that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you guys have a warm summer where you are, and I will continue enjoying my winter down here. I will talk to you guys next time.
I feel the snow and sleet without